All right, today we celebrate the start of Black History Month. It's a time to pay tribute to the generations of trailblazers who helped shape America and, of course, the struggles they overcame in the process. And this morning we look back at the life and legacy of Marvin Arrington Sr., a former judge and longtime city council president who was instrumental in shaping Atlanta, where we are now, into the Black Mecca that it's known as today. A newly released documentary called Bowlegs, Marvin Arrington Sr., an Atlanta story, tells the story of his rise from integrating Emory University Law School to becoming a fixture in Atlanta politics.
Marvin fought the fight.
He was one of the major players, the barrier breaker.
He built one of the largest African-American firms here in the United States, and nobody gave him anything. He built it from scratch.
Okay, so joining us this morning is the writer and director of the film, Adelin Gasana. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to see this documentary, so we're glad to have you here for the first day to celebrate. So tell us, for those who are not from Atlanta, which is where we are right now, tell us a little bit about this history and why Arrington Sr. was so important to Atlanta.
He was one of the beginning type of stalwart leaders after post-civil rights. So you talking about after Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, he's one of the, he comes out of that fertile ground. And then Atlanta begins to assert itself into kind of representational politics. And so being more represented in government, he's one of the leaders. He follows the Maynard Jackson, the Andrew Young mold. And he really he's a visionary. Especially coming from the humble beginnings of his past, he saw where Atlanta could be, and he saw down the road, and then tactically how we get there. And so his work as a lawyer, his work as a behind-the-counter guy who puts legislation together, it just worked. And he was able to knock down barriers, bring African Americans into representative politics so they can dictate city policy, and then therefore Atlanta grows out of that.
And you, for this, you interviewed a lot of former Atlanta mayors, and Atlanta has had a really interesting history with civil rights, as you mentioned, and that it has been a little different from the state of Georgia as a whole. Specifically, the mayors have been really integral. So tell me what you learned through those interviews.
It's interesting enough, I'm the writer-director of the documentary Bowlegs, but prior to that, I worked on the Maynard Jackson documentary entitled Maynard. That was the archival research. In fact, that's how I was recruited to be part of this project. And Maynard Jackson was the first black mayor of a major southern city in 1972. And so when he's elected, after that, every mayor in Atlanta is an African American. But part of it is he shows African Americans can lead in the front. And and then Marvin, who's the city council president, which really at the time is the vice mayor, the second in charge in the city, he's leading behind the scenes, crafting legislation, being Maynard Jackson's floor leader. And so what then that does is it creates a ripple effect where after Maynard Jackson, of course, it's Andrew Young, and then Maynard Jackson comes back again, and of course Bill Campbell, Shirley Franklin, Kasim Reed, and Shirley Franklin, and Keisha Lance Bottoms. And so that creates this entire avant-garde of really black leadership who takes pride in what Atlanta was and in what it became.
And can you tell us a little bit about how Arrington kind of influenced Atlanta when you live here? Yes. And when you drive around? Is there anything that you can kind of point out and show his legacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was integral in MARTA, expanding MARTA in its early stages and whatnot. Seeing that Atlanta, if it's going to continue to grow, needs to build the kind of infrastructure and transportation to accommodate for this growth. He helped bring the Olympics here.
Which was huge for Atlantans.
It made a big splash in the world scene, and we became an international city because of it. And part of how he was able to do is, again, crafting legislation, putting city codes together, and then creating the funding apparatus to make the city to come. And to kind of go back a little bit on the history of it, up into the mid-1960s, Atlanta was considered the city too busy to hate. Yeah. And part of that is because in that era, Jackson, Mississippi, Birmingham, Alabama was a little farther ahead as far as growth and potential, but Atlanta didn't want to be part of that past, of their past. So you didn't see the kind of viciousness visually as far as racism, the dogs and the hoses and whatnot. So Atlanta really turned the corner, and it shows a little bit so much about the progressive community that was here, blacks and whites, and willing to be part of this change and saying, we're better than this. And so this is when Atlanta starts what they call Atlanta Rising. And then of course, in the 1980s, then we get the moniker of the Black Mecca. And so a generation of African Americans who went on to be in the Great Migration to the North started realizing, wait, African Americans are being represented equitably in the city of Atlanta. African businesses are booming, a growing black middle class. It's come on by. And then that's when the whole Mecca became a Mecca for education, became a Mecca for growth and opportunity. And therefore you had this swell of African Americans that come back. And of course you can't forget the HBCU tradition as well.
Sure.
Our big HBCU block, Morehouse College, Spelman, Morehouse Brown College, Clark Atlanta, these create this fertile ground of a next generation of educated minded people who want to get part in civic activism.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta history is just so fascinating as a whole, and just all the individual people that really made it what it is today. It's so fascinating to learn about.
Yes.
All right, Adelin Gasana, thank you so much for being here today. Your documentary, Bowlegs, Marvin Arrington Sr. and Atlanta Story, is available streaming on Apple TV, Google, YouTube Movies, and Amazon Prime. So definitely check that out. All right, we'll be right back.